Hi and welcome! My previous video was about how I approach 3D level design with modular pieces. And as I mentioned in that video, in this one I'll show you how I go from an empty scene to a space that feels, well, atmospheric and alive, sharing some techniques and practices I learned and assets I've come to rely on over the last few years. And this video is sponsored by Unity. They have a current Black Friday sale going on from November the 19th to December the 10th, with hundreds of assets at 50% their original price, or even less during the flash deals. Most of the assets you'll see me working with are part of the sale, so if you are interested in picking anything up, you will find a link to the complete list in the pinned comment. Let's start with the landscape itself. And my first step is not to start with placing any vegetation, but a human model. This one comes from the Medieval Fantasy Heroes pack by Polysplit Games, which is among my favorite low-poly character packs recently. The importance of having a model in a scene as a point of reference can't be overstated. If you skip this step, you'll have to resize a lot of things at a later point. Especially trees can suddenly look vastly too large or way too small in comparison. I'll want to walk through the scenery I set up, so I'll use Molbar's Animal Controller, which does support humans, even though it might not sound like it. All I have to do is to attach an animator to my character, pick which avatar to use, then right-click in the hierarchy and select Create Humanoid Player Character. It'll do some stuff in the background, but that's already all that's needed to have a functional player character in the scene. Okay, but now for real, creating the landscape. Let's get rid of this initial flat surface. I have started to work more and more with a built-in terrain system, even for smaller spaces over the last few months. The reason for that is that it makes it really easy to draw textures onto the ground, but even more so because I can quickly spawn randomized vegetation wherever I need it. To get the most of the terrain system, go and get these 3 free assets. The Terrain Sample Asset Pack by Unity, because without it, you'll be limited to some questionably limited stamp shapes to work with. The Stamp It Free Collection by Rowland, to get some beautiful height maps of some real places to get inspired by. And make sure to install the terrain tools you'll find in the Unity registry. You'll miss out on about at least half the tools available to you if you skip this. With these 3, you are well prepared to get started. This video won't be a how-to-terrain tutorial, however, that would go beyond the scope of this video. But I'm sure if you follow along, or at least see it in action, you might pick up on some elements to work with, and there are always tutorials out there to look stuff up in. For this scenario, you'll see Triforge Assets' Fantasy Worlds Forest and his newly released Fantasy World environment in action. And while I'm setting up some trees and details, let's go through what makes me curious about any given nature asset. When I'm looking for a good nature pack, I look for 3 things in particular. First, variety in the trees offered, for example for different growth states, but also which kinds of trees there are. A forest that's only consisting of one variety of tree never made me happy. I like to have options. Fantasy Worlds comes with 3 kinds of trees: thick leafy ones, birches, and spruces. There are also at least 2 of each kind, which gives some nice variety out of the box. And as you can see when working with tree meshes on a terrain, you can set a minimum and maximum size you want to paint, which makes placing trees a breeze. They will also get randomly rotated, so that even if you are only working with a few models, your area will look random and diverse enough. The second quality criteria is what the trees look like in motion. Are there vegetation shaders in action, or does it look frozen in time? Both can be alright, depending on what kind of scene I'm trying to achieve, but I mostly tend to lean towards animated vegetation at this stage. I had overlooked at first that you will need a wind component to make the trees move, but the demo scenes are great to understand how the system works. And third, do I find different trunk shapes? There are some really cool looking packs on the store when it comes to trees, but I've seen a few too many straight cylinder-shaped trunks the width of my arm over the years. This forest pack, and especially his newer Fantasy World pack, check this box. Great bonuses are things like a solid collection of rocks and ground clutter like grasses, flowers, bushes and such. His older set is a bit lacking in rocks, but his newer pack brings some of the nicest looking rocks I've seen in quite a while. These two sets work well together, and while I'll be using the trees of the forest pack here, I'm kind of a bit homesick to WoW, and these trees scratch that itch well, I'll pick some ground foliage and rocks from the newly released world pack. You might pick up on the fact that the colors feel a little bit clashing. The trees are much warmer in color temperature than the rocks, which makes the rocks not fit as well as they could. But you can easily change slight color differences between packs by picking one pack as your base and then going into the materials of the other packs you are using and carefully tweak the colors you find in them to make them match. Make sure your monitor's night mode isn't toggled on when you do this, or you might be surprised about your results the next morning. And as an aside, if you need to spawn elements along a path, for example these fences here, you might enjoy experimenting with the Spline tool found in the toolbox right here. You just set a few points in your scene, add a Spline spawner component, define which objects to spawn and can customize it to some degree. Super useful and built in. To think I placed so many elements in my games by hand when this would have taken a fraction of the time. Well, that's the cool part about game development. You will constantly learn new techniques. And also, when you are working on some landscape, have some references to pull from when you are just getting started at least. They are super useful to remind oneself about how a forest floor looks like and which details to pick up on. But I'm not advocating for creating ultra-realistic places here. Create whatever fits your game the best and makes you happy. When I'm designing any kind of landscape, I like to place the camera in specific points where I expect the player to be in and think about where they are probably headed towards. A town in the distance, the edge of the map, or maybe some questy looking area off the main road. These are the key points I use to work out how to guide the player's eyes by using leading lines like paths, man-made structures or rivers, contrasts like thick vegetation versus sparse vegetation, or lights and shadows, and quite obvious focal points like signs, lanterns, or elements which break out of the surrounding area. If not a whole lot of elements are moving, adding butterflies to specific points could be a neat way to make people notice some movement on screen, for example. If my worlds were larger, I'd have some huge structure like particularly large trees, a castle, or a statue far off in the distance, so players could use it as a point of orientation. But you can always use elements like that at a smaller scale around the areas too, as long as you keep lines of sight open enough. These mentioned camera locations are basically where I want the player to stop and look around, be it to figure out where to go next, like a crossroads, but also, and that's probably a bit vain, I want them to look at their surroundings and go, wow, or, well, at least shrug appreciatively about the work I put in. The parts in between will then be filled in a way that they don't obstruct important elements, or quite the opposite, obstructing them in a way that leads to another particularly memorable place for the player to be in just a few steps ahead. One thing I also enjoy a lot, but I'm still practicing, is placing small storytelling places into the scene that don't really lead to anything, but make the world a bit more lived in, like some random clutter a traveler might have lost along the way, a broken down cart, leftovers of a recent camp and such. To make working with larger scenes more manageable, you might want to check out vHierarchy 2 too. Even just those 3 buttons you see to the left of each entry in the hierarchy makes this asset an easy recommendation for me. You can toggle the visibility of elements, you can toggle the active state of elements, but my absolute favorite is that you can also toggle the ability to touch the elements on and off. Ever misclicked and suddenly found yourself in the middle of a huge list of child objects and needed to find your way back to what you actually wanted to select? This is your solution. Super handy. So, with the initial scene setup done, let's see how we can go from serviceable to really atmospheric. And the upcoming assets are not meant as a get all of these at once, but just highlight what's out there and might be interesting to you. The default light in a scene comes with soft shadows, but really, if I can still count leaves on the ground, I'd hardly call that soft. Depending on the art style you are going for, you might even need softer shadows. One of my favorite asset creators is called Connect, and has an ultra simple drop-in asset called Umbra Soft Shadows. Import it into the project, add its feature to your renderer settings, and attach the Umbra Soft Shadow component to your directional light. The result is instant. Shadows are much softer and look a lot more natural than before. There are more things to tinker with inside the component, but even just the default settings look very nice. Setting the sample count to 4 leads to still having some leaves outlined, while the general effect doesn't call as much attention to itself anymore. Super Atmospheric is also their volumetric fog and mist 2 asset. It takes a moment to set up, but the way it adds dusty wisps, clouds, or even just a solid fog bank if needed to your scene is great. Especially when working with volumetric effects like this, keep your FPS in mind and check if what you are doing won't turn your action game into a picture book. Certainly happened to me at one point. I'm not quite done with Connect, but I'll come back to it in a moment. Let's populate the skies first. I love birds in games. So a while ago I looked through the store to see what I can find to scratch that particular itch. That's when I came across Unlock Software's Bird Flock Bundle and realized a while ago was already 2 years ago? Oops! These birds aren't just particles, they have some logic to them. Like flying around things, or one of my absolute favorite parts of this asset, perching on stuff. I love this feature. You can even scare them off. To test this, set your bird count quite high so there will always be at least one to search a place to land on soon. Just remember to reduce it afterwards again, or your player might see it as a particularly ill omen. You will have to switch the shaders over to URP by yourself, but that's done in just a few clicks. And next up, there's a developer out there I was a bit on the fence on at first, but after working with their assets for a while, I can confidently add them to my list of easy recommendations: Distant Lands. They created Lumen, stylized light effects. And this asset was provided to me by Unity after I picked it from a list of assets I was especially curious about. This asset lets you create beautiful light effects in your scene without having to actually use lights. And as somebody who cut their teeth on lights for at least a few weeks, let me tell you, lights can bring the worst headaches. I especially love this dappled lighting, which fits perfectly into any foresty scene. It can do a whole lot more, but this effect alone makes me go, I want this. Their light effects for fires are great as well, and as somebody who defaults to rainbows whenever I create VFX graphs, I will have to find a place for the more colorful ones at some point, of course. Each of the effects can be customized to fit your specific need, and they look gorgeous at runtime. I'll be keeping the light of the torches going forward, but deactivate the God rays for now. You'll see why in a moment. Alright, let's get out the big guns. There is no other specialist nature or scenery asset I can recommend more highly than Cozy Weather 3. This one is seriously mighty. In essence, it's a complete weather and time system for your game. You start by importing it and adding the Cozy Manager to your scene, then will promptly fall down a rabbit hole full of features and elements you hardly gave a thought to before. At least I didn't. This is so fun to tinker around with, and that Cozy has one of the prettiest UI I have ever come across in Unity assets is only part of it. As you can see, it took over quite some control of my scene, adding a whole lot more elements to it like a sun and moon, and potentially even more celestials. I leave Umbra Soft Shadows toggled off for this, so you can see how it looks out of the box. Your initial steps will most likely be the time and date sliders, although the time one has a more immediate wow effect. If you play the game, you'll see that the time is ticking by, day turning to night, with sun and moon moving across the sky. I sped up the passage of time here, of course. You'll also see particles being added, like leaves dancing in the wind, or glowworms during night. There is weather too, like thunderstorms, fogs, or rain. All these things can be customized, sometimes to an almost worrying degree. In my current game Moonveil, a friend of mine tested something and managed to get the starfall effect when starting the game, and while we both agreed the effect was just ever so slightly too much, it still made a big impression. It's still in the game, just now with a fraction of the amount of shooting stars. Don't forget to tinker with the clouds as well. There are a lot to choose from, and if you get the extra plume pack, even volumetric ones, and there are mobile optimized skies as well. I typically test my scenes without sound, but Cozy does add sounds as well. Again, very customizable to your needs. The owl sound is the first to get ripped out by me whenever I put this into a project, however. I love owls, but man, this one is noisy. If your game has any outdoor area at all, and you enjoy crafting that to your heart's content with a good supporting foundation, you need to check out Cozy. It comes alone with separate packages, but also with a bundle of even more modules, just in case you didn't have enough already. My absolute favorite one is Horizon, which lets you easily add a surrounding horizon to your scene. As with everything coming from this developer, it is easy to use, very customizable, and has a very good UI to work with. And I can't forget the scheduler here. Another neat aspect I forgot to mention at the time of day part is that this has a solid system to hook events up in. For example, here's some code to call an event if a method is being called. I have another script, which I attach to the lights in my scene, to toggle those on and off at specific times of the day. In Cozy, I can go to the tab at the bottom and find a list of events offered to me. I'll hook up the calendar in the night and morning slots like this. Once back in game, the fires get reliably triggered based on the time of day. I love the system. There is so much you can do with it. And if you need even more control, there is Cozy Habits, which I haven't tinkered with as of yet, but just look at this. This is excessively amazing. And hey, if you enjoyed this video so far, I'd appreciate a like and maybe consider subscribing. I have a couple more videos like this in which I showcase assets I've been using over the years and enjoyed very much, from those I installed into every project by default, over some that helped me create a complete game prototype or polish up scenes. I still use the vast majority of the assets I've shown before, and I recommend giving them a look if you are looking for recommendations. Okay, back to world building. A forest only really feels like a forest once it has the sounds of the forest. And maybe you don't want to use Cozy or want to have your own sounds to hook up into it. I like to use the aptly named Environment Sounds Pack by Placeholder Inc. What a combination of names. It has just the right amount of birds, ambience, insects and general nature sounds to me to make the scene feel alive. If you want to add animals to your scene, you have to check out Mulber's animations. He doesn't just offer the character controller I mentioned above, he has the most natural acting, or well, animated, digital animals I've ever seen, and I'm not just limiting this by adding on the store. No, actually mean in general. Thanks to Unity I was able to pick up his polyart forest animal set with 10 different creatures you might find in any given RPG. No matter which game I play, animals almost always will make me stop and stare for a while. They are also super useful little helpers in guiding the player to secret areas. Following some creature in a forest and suddenly finding yourself in a cool new area, secret location, or around some neat treasure is something I'd love to see more in games. And Marbles, in case you are watching this, may I propose a guinea pig asset in the future? Please? Would be awesome. Okay, with all of this hooked up, let's check what the results look like in game. It's come quite a way, hasn't it? And lastly, I'll circle back to Connect with Beautify 3. If you haven't seen Beautify before, it's a replacement for Unity's built-in post-processing system. In my opinion, it's a lot easier to use and offers a whole lot more features as well. I never really warmed up to Unity's way of having multiple modules to navigate. Having all and more in just one long list like this works so much better for me. I'll typically increase the saturation and contrast ever so slightly to get a more vibrant look. A bit of a vignette at the corners will make the scenery in the center pop a little bit more. And of course, adding some bloom to it will instantly level up the lights in my scene. Once I am done with all of this setup, I like to add some more effects to the scene, like falling leaves and adding the remaining amount of loose stones, pebbles, twigs and more. As a general tip, if you are working with darker scenes and need more light to work, you can switch the rendering to unlit draw mode up here. This will make everything look rather flat, but perfect for last touch-ups and checks. And here's a before and after to see which effects the assets had. And for those of you who are curious, I made a build and attached the profiler to it, where all effects are toggled on. I am not yet at the stage of being at all knowledgeable about performance optimizations, but these numbers look alright to me. I hope you enjoyed this and maybe even learned a thing or two. I put a lot of what I've learned over the last year into it, and it's quite a good overview of the tools I enjoy most when creating outer scenes. And about 2 weeks ago, I published a video about how to create scenes that feature modular parts like buildings. So if you like this, I'm sure you are going to enjoy that one as well. And as mentioned, you'll find the link to the assets mentioned in here in the first comment. Hope to see you in the next video again. Have a great week!